Welcome to the British Society for Immunology webinar series, Careers in Immunology. My name is Olin Healy and I'm the Education and Careers Officer at the BSI, and I am your host for today. This series is an opportunity to give immunology graduates and immunology researchers an insight to a wide range of careers that are perhaps different from the standard academic route, and just give you a taste for the variety of options that are available. Today's webinar will look at the role of the secondary school science teacher. The speaker is Victoria McGregor, a Glasgow-based science teacher and graduate of immunology. And Victoria will talk about teaching in general, the day-to-day realities of the job, touch on teacher training, and other aspects of the profession. Just for some housekeeping, so Victoria's presentation will be like 25-30 minutes long, and then that will be followed by a short 10 to 15 minute Q&A where I will field questions to Victoria. If you have any questions of your own, you can drop them in the chat box on Zoom, but please can you wait until we are at the Q&A section and not during Victoria's presentation in order to do that. And I hope you very much enjoy this webinar. I think it'll be a really interesting topic. So I'll hand over to you, Victoria.
Brilliant, thank you. So as has just been said, I am a secondary school science teacher at a Glasgow-based school and have been for coming up to about 6 years now. And I was an immunology graduate at the University of Glasgow. So what I thought I would do is just one of those cheesy wee bits about me first. So I attended the University of Glasgow and graduated from there in 2013 with a Bachelor of Science Honours degree in Immunology. Absolutely loved it, loved the subject, loved biology. It's why I chose to go to Glasgow. We were able to do a lot of different sort of topics and then specialise later on. And I just absolutely fell in love with immunology, just thought it was so interesting, and so decided to pursue that as my specialist subject. Due to a variety of reasons, which I'll sort of touch on later on, I decided to take a year out before going to the University of Edinburgh to study for my teacher training degree. Up in Scotland, it's called a PGDE, but it's kind of equivalent to the PGCE elsewhere in the UK. And I graduated with a PGDE in biology and science, which tends to be what's done in the UK, where you teach sort of general science to lower school pupils, and then your specialist subject further on up the school. I've then spent the last 6 years teaching in various schools throughout central Scotland, been in, I think, about 5 different schools now, starting to lose count. But that's me pretty settled in the school that I'm in now, managed to get a permanent post, which I'll chat about again a wee bit later on. So this slide is going to make me sound like a little bit of a flake. I was not one of these people who wanted to be a teacher from like the day that they were able to explain something to somebody else. To be honest, if you'd asked me whilst I was at school, I would have thought teaching was my absolute worst nightmare. So my road to teaching was a wee bit strange, but I'll explain how I sort of got here to begin with. So when I was 8 years old, I did a topic in primary school all about ancient Egypt. I just thought it was amazing. It was around about the same times that you watch all the Indiana Jones movies. So I was absolutely adamant that I wanted to be an archaeologist. And I think that was kind of my first insight into really being interested in the sort of science field. So although I obviously didn't pursue that later on, I definitely had those science skills starting to develop, and realised how interested I was in it. But yeah, definitely wanted to be Indiana Jones when I was 8. I then went to secondary school and got sort of experience of a more traditional science classroom, realised that I really enjoyed it. I was quite good at it. And I decided at a careers fair one day, which again is where it maybe sounds like I just sort of make these decisions on a whim, that being a dietitian sounded really interesting, which meant that when I was taking my subjects, I really focused in on those science subjects and took a couple of different sciences for my sort of middle years at high school for my first lot of qualifications. By then I was pretty set on science in general, but maybe not entirely sure what I wanted to do. By the end of secondary school, I wanted to save the world, so decided that going into sort of clinical research would be my sort of ideal job role. There's a few different things going on in my personal life at that time, and I just really, really wanted to help others. So I thought a clinical researcher would be the best way for me to sort of do that on like a broader scale. And so I decided to go to the University of Glasgow because I wasn't 100% sure exactly where I wanted to specialise, and they gave me the like opportunity to experience lots of different roles and lots of different specialisms before having to decide exactly which one it was that I wanted to pick. After doing my immunology sort of introductory course in second year, I decided that that was 100% what I wanted to do, and ended up doing that for my last 2 years at uni. Our bachelor degrees last for 4 years up here, so I was a total of 4 years. At the end of that, I then decided that teaching actually wasn't for me, and I'll explain how I came to that decision in a second. So at the age of 22, I decided that a secondary school teacher was probably the best route for me, and I spent a little bit of time making sure that that was definitely what I wanted to do before going on to apply for my initial teacher education training, which again, I will be discussing during this PowerPoint. So how I came to that decision then, as I've just shown you, teaching was never sort of on my radar. I'd been told by quite a few people, both at secondary school and in my home life, saying that they thought I would be a fantastic teacher, that I can explain things really well, and why don't I consider it? And to be honest, until my final year of university, I was laughing at these people, saying that it just sounded dreadful. Why would I want to be a teacher? Like, imagine having to spend time with all those kids. But you really don't see the sort of great side of teaching, I would say, when you're in school. You maybe don't appreciate, especially if you're one of those pupils like me who just sort of coasted along. I didn't require much teacher input. I could kind of be left to it, and I didn't really see the impact that a teacher can have like in a child's life, which I have been able to sort of experience now on the other side of it. So at the end of my final year at uni, for my immunology degree, I hadn't done as well as I'd expected. My mother had been going through sort of cancer treatment at the time. I was going through genetic counselling myself, like to see whether I had any genetic problems that they had to pick up on. And I just realised that I wasn't particularly happy. And although I loved immunology, and I still love immunology now and find it absolutely fascinating, the thought of working in a lab for the rest of my life just didn't appeal. I had a Saturday job at the time in a local like electrical retailer, and I much preferred going into there than into the lab, and realised that actually lab work probably wasn't for me. So I immediately made an appointment with the careers counsellor at our university, who asked me why I was there, and I promptly burst into tears, feeling very embarrassed about what had happened. He sort of passes me a box of tissues and assures me that it happens to absolutely everybody that comes in to speak to them. But I was mortified. And I just sort of explained that I kind of felt like I'd wasted my time a bit. Why had I picked this when I don't even want to do it anymore? It had been 4 whole years of university and like working really hard to try and get through it. And I felt like I'd made a huge mistake. So he assured me that I hadn't. And I sort of rolled my eyes and thought, I bet you say that to everybody. And he sent me away with some homework, which was to fill in those silly like personality questionnaires. Do you enjoy working with people? Do you enjoy working as part of a team? Like rating on a scale of like 1 to 5, how much you would like to do that? Do you want to work outdoors? All those sort of different things. And then it came back with about 100 different job options for me, with one at the top what I would be most suited towards based on what my responses were, down to the thing that I would be like least suited to. And on the very, very top of that list was secondary school education. So again, I laughed and I said to my mum, I was like, look, what's came up, as if I'm going to go into teaching, like that just sounds dreadful. And my mum was like, well, I don't see why it's that silly. So I sort of sat on it for a while. I had an appointment the next week and sort of chatted through it with the careers counsellor about how, although I'd never really thought about teaching before, it would maybe be something that I would like to explore. Although I'd never thought about it, it maybe is something that I would find quite interesting. And it would sort of tick all the boxes that I was talking about earlier on about what I really want to get out of life. I wanted to be making a difference in people's lives. And although it sounds silly, like doing that in the classroom, like I do genuinely believe that if the pupils have a teacher who's very, very interested and passionate about their subject, then that's going to filter through to them. And although I'm totally biased, I do believe that science education is one of the most important things that we do in our schools. It gives the children so many different transferable skills. It can open a lot of doors to our young people to try and get them into lots and lots of different careers. And I just really think that although the children sitting in front of me in my classroom might not necessarily go into a science career, the skills that we teach them in science, they can really take with them anywhere. And so I really believe that we're making a difference. So after I'd sort of thought through all that, I thought, do you know what? I think I'm going to try this. So as I said, I took a year out, and during my year out, I decided to try and make sure that teaching was 100% what I wanted to do. So I got in contact with some neighbours of my current husband, who was then my fiance. His next door neighbours were secondary school teachers at one of the private schools in Glasgow. And they were able to arrange for me to get some school experience. So to make sure that the reality of teaching and what I had in my head that it was actually what I wanted to do. I would strongly recommend absolutely everybody to do that. As I say, I didn't have the best sort of impression of teaching anyway, in terms of I thought it would be too difficult, I thought it would be too stressful, I thought I wouldn't enjoy it. So just going into that school and seeing that actually the good definitely outweighs the bad. I think that education and teaching in general gets quite a lot of bad press at the moment in terms of things like workload balance, the stresses that are put on teachers. And although they are all things that we do need to think about and things that I do think people should be aware of going into the profession, actually the benefits far, far outweigh those things. The joy that you get when a pupil suddenly understands something that they didn't understand before, or hearing a pupil say that they want to go on and do science after their secondary school education's finished. All of those things, I think, definitely outweigh the bad. So I was really fortunate that I was able to get that teaching experience and just make sure that it was definitely what I thought it was going to be before applying for my teacher training. So whilst I was doing that, at sort of the same time, I was on the UCAS website checking what universities offered the course that I wanted to do, and where and when I was to apply, what sort of information I needed to be able to apply, just to make sure that as soon as those applications opened, I had everything that I needed in order to apply for the teacher training course. And then also doing some research, so prepping for interviews. Every university that I applied to had a few different things that they wanted you to do, but one of them was an interview to show that actually you knew what the reality of teaching was, you knew what was expected, you knew what the current roughly guidance was. And although they're obviously not expecting you to know it all, it's good to definitely have a sort of idea of the big picture, like what the government is trying to achieve through our education system today. So applying then, we currently apply for teacher training through UCAS. In Scotland, we can only apply through UCAS to university-based programmes. I know that that's not necessarily the case across the rest of the UK, but I don't have much information about those other ones, I'm afraid. So I can only really talk to the UCAS teacher training process. So the very, very first thing that I did was I checked the universities to see which ones were local enough to me that I would be able to get to them, to make sure that they were offering the biology with science, because not all universities offer all of the sciences or any of the sciences. And I was quite fortunate that a few of the ones in the central belt of Scotland offered these courses. So then the next step was to complete the application form, including a personal statement. What I would recommend for when you're doing and filling in the application form is to do the whole like write it out, save it, go back, check that everything's okay. Your personal statement really needs to get across your passion for education, why it is that you want to go into education, what you think you can bring to education. And it's always worthwhile getting maybe somebody who's in education to read over it for you, or even anybody that's sort of involved in recruitment. I had family members who are managers in retail settings or professional settings who would read over it for me to make sure that this sounds like a person that you want to hire, that you want to have in your business. Because although it's not a business we're going into, it's really the same sort of commitment that you're needing to bring to it. So I just had, I'm going to be honest, I had quite a few people read over my personal statement just to make sure that it was definitely okay before I sent it off. You also need references. I contacted the person who was the head of our immunology programme because they were able to talk about the things that I'd learned during my immunology degree that I was able to bring into teacher training. So although I hadn't thought about it at the time when I was sitting sobbing in a careers counsellor office, there's actually huge sections of an immunology degree, not content based, but like personal things based or different transferable skills that we learn during an immunology degree that we can really bring to education. So for example, if you had said to me in my second year of university, oh, you'll be standing up in front of kids every single day and just chatting away to them as if you've got the confidence to do that, I would never in a million years have believed that I would be able to do that. But the fact that during my third and fourth years, we were, well, forced, for lack of a better term, to stand up in front of our peers and say, this is the research that I'm doing and this is what I've learned from it. Those sort of like presenting skills are absolutely essential for education and for teaching. And it's things like that, the confidence that I gained during my immunology degree, as well as the biology knowledge that I gained, has all been very important for my teaching career. So my referee was really able to talk about all those things, everything that my immunology degree had done in order to prepare me for the world of teaching. And I also had my manager at the time from my Saturday job fill one out because they were able to sort of talk about like my work ethic and things like that. But your references, it's similar to when you're applying to your undergrad. It can kind of be anybody as long as they've not got a personal link with you. But I think it's really good if you can get someone who can really talk about how you would be in the classroom and what skills you have for getting into the classroom. And then the final step, once you've submitted all that, you'll get offers from universities to come and attend interviews. And they can take a few different like formats. So there's a few different ways that they can do that. So the interview then, it's quite a good chance for you to meet the other candidates. It's nice to hear what other people have done in order to attempt to get into education. Nice to see what other backgrounds they came from. What I really liked about my teacher training is you were coming together with people from all sorts of different specialities. And if you have a look at like the sort of course content that's covered in our like qualifications, so I had a quick look on the like GCSE and the A-level ones, and obviously I know the National 5 and the higher course content like inside out by now. There's actually quite a lot of immunology in there. As we know, it's a very hot topic at the moment with everything that's going on in the world with the pandemic. I spend the majority of my day sort of fixing misconceptions, so things that pupils maybe haven't quite understood in the news. But what was really good about these interviews is I was coming at it from an immunology perspective with all of that knowledge to do with immunology, but you were speaking to people who had done zoology degrees or genetics degrees or any of the other biology specialisms, and really just bouncing off of these other people and figuring out what it is that they think that they can bring to the table. I feel like that really helped me to understand what exactly would be expected of me in teaching, because you're kind of expected to know all of this information enough to be able to teach it to pupils. So it was really good to speak to the other candidates. They are sort of watching everything that you get up to, so I would recommend obviously being as friendly as possible. I know it kind of sounds like I'm teaching you to do something that you already know, but I do think it's just worth mentioning that the whole interview, even before it officially starts, is the interview. So being chatty and sociable with the other candidates in a professional manner can really sort of tick that box and help you out. I was then asked at all of the interviews that I did to do a presentation, usually 5 to 10 minutes. I've certainly not been asked to do anything longer unless it's all substantially changed now. And the content depended on the university. So I had one university ask me to do a 5 to 10 minute presentation on anything that I wanted. So I played the flute in school and decided to do it on playing the flute. The university that I ended up going to asked me to look through the National 5 course content. So what our pupils do when they're like 15, 16 years old, the qualification that they gain then, pick an aspect of that course content and try to like teach a lesson or do an activity of it to really demonstrate what my teaching style would be and whether I'm able to stand up and effectively teach pupils about an unfamiliar topic, so something that they're not used to. And then finally, for everyone, I had to do a one-to-one interview, or maybe there was a couple of people from the university there, but there was never like whole rooms full of people that I had to give an interview to. I think the most was 2. And really, that's just time for them to ask you some questions, and it's really for you to demonstrate your knowledge and your passion for teaching. So when I was speaking about earlier on, the sort of research that you're expected to do, they just want to know that you've generally got a clue about what's happening, that you're not just being in some sort of cave, like not keeping up to date with education today. So just really looking at what it is that the government's like currently the in thing, and just how you would apply that or how you plan to apply that in your teaching. As I said, obviously you're still to go through teacher training, so they're not expecting you to know it all. They don't even expect me to know it all now. We currently go through lots of continued learning and personal development, and there's lots and lots of opportunity for that in teaching, which I'll chat about a wee bit later on, but it's something that I quite like. You're just constantly learning and you're constantly doing new things. Once the interviews were over, we got through our offers from the different universities, so whether they wanted you on your teacher training programme or not. So then I entered my initial teacher education. So for my PGDE, so the year that I was learning to be a teacher, it was split up into roughly about half of the time was spent at university. So that was teaching us about the curriculum and teaching us about pedagogy, so the different like ways that you can teach, the methods that you can use to teach, and the major drivers and policies that the government currently has that's really impacting on teaching just now. We also got chances to work with our peers to try new activities that we would be able to take into the classroom. And really, it was just a time for us to try and hone our skills before going into the actual classroom environment. And that's where the other half of our time was spent. So the other half was school placements. So that's actual practical classroom experience. You would be like given a sort of smaller timetable than a teacher would be given. And it's really just to give you time to learn the day-to-day of the job, see how the department runs, see how the wider school runs. I was really fortunate on all my placements. The wider school information that we were given was great. We had meetings with mentors from throughout the school to learn about all of the different job roles within the school environment. And it was just a really great way in order for you to get that experience of what a school and what teaching is actually like. And then there's also your assessments. So the university side of it was really like your essays, which tend to be at master level for the initial teacher education. Placement files that we kept whilst on placement of all the lessons that we had taught and what feedback we had got from them. They were kept and scrutinised at the end. And then our universities did one observed lesson per school placement. So I did 3 school placements and there was one observed lesson for each one, where a member of staff from the university would come out, watch your lesson, and then discuss with the members of staff at the school to see how it is that you're getting on and whether you should pass that placement or not. And the standards for that will be different for what route it is that you take. So in Scotland, there's standards by the General Teaching Council for Scotland, and they tell you like what it is that you should be achieving at each stage. But it will depend what sort of route you take to go into education, what sort of standards you would be expected to adhere to. So that's worth a wee bit of research before you go into it and deciding on what like pathway to take. As a newly qualified teacher, again, it was a reduced timetable. So after our year at teacher training, we were a newly qualified teacher for a year, and we were given a reduced timetable because it does take a wee bit longer for planning. You're given some additional responsibilities just to help learn about like sort of whole school things rather than just being insular in your classroom. And you're also given regular support. So I was assigned a mentor who I had regular meetings with, so once a week, and they would offer me support about things I weren't sure about. They would guide me, they would do observed lessons and just give me sort of regular feedback to make sure that I was on the right track. Once we're qualified, it's then sort of looking to apply for jobs. And there's a few different things that I think it's worthwhile thinking about when applying for those jobs. So first of all, deciding on what you want. Teaching is relatively flexible in that there is quite a lot of scope for picking something that suits you. So whether that's a permanent position in a school or fixed term where you're only there for maybe a maternity cover or a few months to cover part of a timetable. There tends to be quite a lot of full-time and part-time posts go up. Or even whether you want to be a classroom teacher or supply. Classroom teacher would then guarantee you things like holiday pay, whereas supply tends to be a bit more, you get called at like 8 o'clock in the morning asking you to go to a school for that day. But it means that there is quite a lot of scope for flexibility. Applications tend to be different for each school. Different schools look for different things. I, again, had lots and lots of different people reading over my applications before I sent them away, just to make sure that I hadn't missed anything, whether anything should be in there that shouldn't. In my opinion, you can never have too many people read your applications. The more opinions, the better, just to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward. And then interviews. I've been to every style of interview, but it's your chance to really sort of sell yourself. So you're really like proving what your knowledge is. It's good to speak to other teachers to get examples of questions. At the end of your NQT year, there'll be lots of people that you've sort of met, asking all of them for examples of questions that they've been asked, and then doing the old school sitting in front of the mirror, like practicing speaking to yourself, can be really, really beneficial for those interviews. And schools tend to offer mock interviews as well, so you can ask for a senior member of management to do a mock interview with you to give you feedback on how they would suggest that you improve your interview technique. So science teaching then, I firmly believe that we have a great opportunity to inspire the next generation of scientists. Some pupils can quite struggle with science, depending on what their primary school experience of it has been. Sometimes they can come to us with some gaps in their knowledge, but I really think that an enthusiastic teacher can sort of overcome some of those issues. It's a really, really fun and practical subject. It's particularly with my lower school, there's not really a lesson that goes by without doing some sort of activity or some sort of experiment. And that really comes down to the transferable skills that I was discussing earlier on. We're teaching the pupils to be critical thinkers. We're teaching them to like discuss with partners, to tell someone else what it is that they've learned. And all these transferable skills can be used like regardless of what they're going into. So I really believe that a science qualification is of great benefit to any of our pupils. And also it's really relatable to the current climate. We get lots of myths and misconceptions about COVID and the pandemic and how it spreads, and currently vaccinations. I get asked about vaccinations quite a lot. And I find that my immunology degree has been invaluable in making sure that I'm giving the pupils relevant and like proper information. So information that means that they're not going to be too scared, but also to like really impress on the severity of the situation. but they hear all sorts of things, whether that's on the news or whether it's from home or whether it's from each other or whatever's on TikTok this week. So it's really good, in my opinion, to be in a position to help them really think about what it is that they're learning from elsewhere and how to apply their critical thinking skills to that. This slide started off as my day-to-day, and then I realised that it's actually missing quite a lot of information if I just discuss one day. So this is kind of more of a full overview. So the things that I'm going to discuss just now, they wouldn't necessarily be done every single day, but over the course of a term, for example, they would be. So our sort of bread and butter is teaching our classes, so being either in front of the class or the prep work involved, so the planning the lesson, the sorting out resources for the lesson, the evaluating the lesson afterwards. In my opinion, the best part of our job is actually standing in front of the kids teaching them. Unfortunately, there is also quite a lot of paperwork, whether that be marking assessments or homeworks, recording information to keep track of how pupils are achieving in our subject, and then reporting that information, whether that be to home or whether that be to the management in the school. And then there's all the extra stuff, so stuff that you wouldn't necessarily get every single day or even every week, but they do come up. So staff meetings with other members of the department or the whole school, pupil enrichment, so things like clubs, extracurriculars, putting together new resources. Sometimes whole schools and local authorities can come together, all your continued personal development. Okay, all of that is stuff that we're expected to do sort of constantly. And it's all really just about making sure that we're constantly improving our practice so that the pupils in front of us are getting the best deal that they possibly can, so that they're achieving what they need to achieve. Next is just a wee bit on career progression, just to give you an idea of where sort of teaching can take you. So I would say that there's actually quite a lot of classroom teacher opportunities, so not necessarily moving up the career ladder, but there are lots of leadership opportunities for a classroom teacher. So for example, at the moment, I'm doing sort of extra stuff to do with transition from primary school to secondary school, which isn't necessarily like another career, but it's something that I'm definitely able to like enhance my practice, and it would be the sort of thing that would be a stepping stone to a promotion within the school. Next is sort of your middle management roles. So your extended leadership team within a school can be like principal teachers of subjects, faculty heads of more than one subject. I'm in quite a small school at the moment, and so we have a faculty head of science who sort of oversees all of the science teachers. And then there's also pupil support if you're wanting to focus more on the pupil side of things rather than the like other members of staff. So you would have a cohort of pupils where you're responsible for their holistic development rather than just their academic attainment. And then if you wanted to move up again, there would be senior management, which would be sort of looking at your deputy head teachers or head teachers within a school. There also tends to be secondment opportunities within councils where you would go work more centrally with the council to develop different resources. So yeah, there's quite a lot of career progression, and it would just depend on what school you were in and what sort of opportunities were available in your local authority about how you would be able to go through them. But the good thing is that there's also quite a lot of leadership opportunities for classroom teachers, so there's always something different to do. I just wanted to add in a wee bit about challenges that face teaching at the moment, so the things that we're really focusing on. So a big one just now, particularly after things like remote learning, is narrowing the attainment gap. So our poorest students were impacted most heavily by the COVID pandemic. They maybe didn't have access to Wi-Fi or laptops. They maybe didn't have a parent at home all the time. Their parents were maybe working shifts. There was lots of different things. So I think the COVID pandemic has really highlighted the difference between our poorest students and our richest students. And narrowing the attainment gap is just about us doing everything that we can to make sure that the students that don't have the same access are still able to progress and reach their potential. So that's quite a big thing at the moment. There's no getting away from it. It's in the news quite a lot. There is a teacher shortage, especially in some of the STEM subjects. Demand for the subject and demand in the schools is definitely outstripping the supply of teachers. That is quite a good thing in terms of being able to like gain employment, but at the same time, you really have to think about what impact that has on your day-to-day. So for example, in my department at the moment, we are all on what we call minimum time. So we've all got maximum classroom exposure, which sort of means minimal planning time. And it's just because there's just not enough teachers to fill the posts that we've got. And then finally, there can be workload challenges. I think it's quite important to have boundaries and to stick to them. Teaching is much more than just your subject. It's much more than just a 9 till 3. There can be quite a lot of time put into lots of different things for teaching. And it's really a fine art trying to balance everything and making sure that you're putting your boundaries in place and sticking to them. Because otherwise you could easily end up working like 80-hour weeks and still not get through your to-do list, which is just the nature of any job, I think. But particularly in teaching, when you've got those kids in front of you and you just want to do your best for them, it can sometimes be quite tricky to put those boundaries into place. Okay, I feel like that was quite a negative way to end it, but honestly, the like benefits and the like happiness that I get from my job like far outweigh any sort of negative things that I have to do with workload, and I wouldn't change it at all. Okay, so hopefully there's maybe a few questions, and that's the end of my presentation.
Great. Thank you, Victoria. That was really excellent, a really comprehensive tour of the teaching profession. So yes, if attendees do have any questions, please pop them in the chat, but I'll just give you some questions now, Victoria. So certainly I remember when I was teacher training myself many moons ago, behavior management was a thing that a lot of the trainees were concerned about. So how challenging has this been for you? And do you have any techniques that you use or tips to deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously behavior management's still a really big thing. It's underwent a bit of a change in the last few years, and we really try to focus on promoting positive behavior rather than like sanctioning negative behavior. It's something that I definitely struggled with in my teacher training. I was told over and over again that I was far too nice, that I like needed to impose boundaries better. And I would say it really clicked for me in my NQT year. So when I was finally in sort of my own school, they weren't used to another classroom teacher. I was their classroom teacher, and I found it a lot easier to sort of impose those boundaries. I think just making sure that the pupils are aware what you expect of them, and just being sort of fair and consistent in that. So for example, if you're a teacher that allows a certain thing, I'll maybe pick something controversial as an example. So for example, some teachers don't mind pupils listening to music in earphones whilst they're completing an independent task, which is fine. It's like personal preference for each teacher, but I don't think you can have like one situation where you would allow that and then the next week you're in a bad mood, so you don't allow it anymore. I think just making sure that you're consistent so that the kids know where they stand and they know exactly what to expect from me every single time they're in the classroom. And I also think just picking up on those positive behaviours, a well done when someone's doing really well, or maybe a pupil who has been struggling with their behaviour in your subject, just like making it clear that you're aware when they're behaving the way that you want them to, and picking them up on that and saying, oh, like you did really well today, like that was so good. We are quite a nurturing school. We're really big on like positive praise and just making sure that the kids are being acknowledged when they're doing something well, and just making sure that every pupil can still sort of access their education. It's so easy to fall into that trap of sort of excluding pupils constantly, whether that be from the school or even just from a particular lesson. But it means that the next time they come in, they've already got that sort of negative association. So I think just being positive and sort of building that rapport with the pupils is sort of the best way to go, and your behaviour management kind of follows on from that.
Cool, brilliant. Another question's come in from an attendee. Do you teach all 3 sciences, and do you teach all year groups?
I currently do teach all year groups. So in Scotland, the secondary school education system, they come to us when they're like 11 or 12 and they're with us until they're about 18. I only teach all of the sciences for the first 2 years when they're doing their broad general education. And then when they're going into our 3rd year, which is about 14 years old, they then pick their discrete sciences. And in Scotland, they remain discrete sciences. There's no option for like combined sciences or anything like that. So from third year onwards, I only teach biology.
Cool. What are the similarities and differences, could you say, from teaching the different levels? So the first few years of secondary school, the kind of more middle years, and then maybe post 16?
Yeah, so yeah, it definitely changes the further up the school we go. I would say as we get to sort of nearer the end, it does become a lot more theory based. We try to keep the first, second, and third year topics as practical as possible. The children then have quite short attention spans. You don't really want to be doing the same activity for sort of more than like 15 minutes, or they're going to get bored and start misbehaving. So we try to sort of switch it up quite a lot in first to third year. When they go into our fourth year, so at 15, that's when they start to do their first set of qualifications. And at that point, it does change quite significantly. You have a course to get through, a course that they could be examined on, which means that we do have to spend quite a lot more of our time like prepping them for assessment, going through like past papers, teaching them how to answer those questions, getting them to think about what they've learned and applying it to those questions. And although we do still do quite a lot of experiments, it's definitely a lot different from further down the school, particularly when we get into the sort of post 16. We do hires, then advanced hires, and each are only a year long. My advanced hire pupils tend to be treated more like I would treat university students. They're kind of left to their own devices. I'll lecture to them the information that they need to know, but it's then really more up to them to go away and learn it and apply it and think about how to answer past paper questions themselves. They also do a project where it's really, really independent. I'm not allowed to give them much support on it. So yeah, it definitely changes. Quite hands-on and active, and lots of experiments for first to third year. And then it definitely becomes a lot more content-based the higher up the school we go.
Great. And just based in terms of career progression and promotion, and kind of maybe coming off what you said about there not being very many, there's not enough teachers and the supply is an issue. Is it easy to get promoted, or is it quite a difficult, challenging thing to kind of go up the greasy pole?
Yeah, I think it definitely depends what sort of career progression you're looking for. And it also, unfortunately, does depend on how big your school is. The bigger the school, and depending on the cohort as well, sometimes the more opportunity there can be for promoted posts within that school. So I'm in quite a small rural school at the moment. However, we have got quite a skewed percentage of pupils who are in that sort of poorest group. And we call it our sort of pupil equity fund, where we get additional money per pupil in order to like provide additional like experiences for those pupils. I think it's called something different in England, sorry, and I can't for the life of me remember what it is, but it's called the Pupil Equity Fund up here. And so we have a teacher who's sort of responsible for that. So they're not a sort of full middle management position, they're sort of in between like a classroom teacher and the middle management. And that can be sort of a good stepping stone to middle management. So like your pupil support jobs or your faculty head jobs. But some of the bigger schools have lots and lots of different roles like that in that sort of middle section before middle management. For middle management, I would say pupil support jobs can be quite difficult to come across unless you're already in the school. Schools do tend to prefer a staff member who knows their pupils just because of the nature of the job. So I know quite a few pupil support teachers who struggled a bit to get there. But it's definitely not impossible. It's not, and I do think the good thing about teaching is it's not really like who you know, it's kind of like what you're shown in the classroom and like whole school. And I think definitely if you can show that you're dedicated, then you can get somewhere. It can maybe just take a wee bit of time to get there.
Yeah. And of course, how scary exactly is a statutory school inspection? I know that's in England, that's done by Ofsted. In Scotland, is it Educate Scotland.
It is.
What is that experience like? Because I know it can fill some teachers with terror.
I mean, it's sort of spoken of in hushed whispers in case you like accidentally summon one.
like Voldemort.
Yeah, don't talk about the inspectors. But yeah, I mean, it is quite scary. I've never been through an official inspection by Education Scotland. I've got staff members who have. Our school, I believe, is overdue one. So we had like a fake inspection last year, like a practice run, which was by sort of senior management and other members of the school, and then somebody from the local authority came in. And to be honest, that was terrifying enough. So I can imagine how much worse it would be like for an actual inspection. However, the good thing about it is I try to look at it as they're just there to make sure that the pupils in my class are getting the best experience that they possibly can. And I think just trying to like detach from it a little bit in terms of what they're telling me isn't personal. It's not to do with like me as a person. They're just saying ways that I can maybe improve my teaching practice to try and help the pupils in my class, which is really what the profession's all about. And so I just tried to look at it that way, but that's a bit easier said than done, I think.
Cool. And then just one final question. So, and this is a question that's affecting many professions. How has the impact of COVID changed the profession? And what would you say, how impactful or effective has remote learning been?
I hated remote learning with a passion. I feel like remote learning really highlighted the differences in achievement between pupils from poorer catchment areas and like more affluent catchment areas. Our poorer pupils were really disadvantaged, whether that be that they just didn't have access. As I said, we're quite a rural school. We do have some pupils who are in households where maybe, I mean, sometimes up to like 6 siblings, and they're all trying to share like 2 laptops, as well as parents who are at home working from home. And it just wasn't possible. There's no way that they could do it. And it was really difficult to get the pupils to respond to you in the same way as they do in a classroom, like on a Google Meet, which is what we used quite a lot, Google Meet on Classroom. They just don't feel comfortable speaking in front of their peers when every single peer is forced to listen to them. It's easy to sort of ask them questions and see how they're getting on when you're right next to them in the classroom. But virtually it was quite difficult. We tried our hardest. We were doing sort of narrated lessons. I tried a couple of live lessons, but again, not every pupil could get on at the exact time that you were doing it, so that was quite tricky. I mean, I'm a Google Classroom pro now, but apart from that, I would say it was really quite difficult, and hopefully that's it finished. I would be quite pleased if we never went back to it again, but you never know.
Well, I'm sure the whole world has their fingers crossed for that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Victoria. That was really excellent. I hope everyone enjoyed that. It was very informative, I feel. This is the second last in our series, Careers in Immunology. We have one more to go in a few weeks' time, which will be on science communications. So please do keep your eyes open for that and check out our website and our social media channels. So again, thank you very much, Victoria, and thanks to all of you for watching, and good day.